lamps hanging from the rafters gave off a golden glow that softened the edges of the old church hall. The long tables had been laid out end to end, covered with white cloths that had seen many suppers and many prayers. Laughter rolled through the room like the easy hum of summer bees. Children ran between chairs with pie-sticky fingers, old men argued about cattle prices, and the preacher's wife poured coffee that steamed in tin mugs. Amid the bustle, Clara sat alone near the end of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her plate only half full. She tried to focus on the hum of voices around her, but her thoughts wandered like they always did. Her father had loved these church suppers, always dragging her along even when she'd rather stay home. He'd sit tall in his chair, nodding to everyone, his deep laugh filling the room. Since he passed that spring, she hadn't wanted to come back. But the preacher's wife had pressed her gently, saying it would do her good to be around folks again. So here she was, dressed in her best blue calico dress, hair pinned up just right, pretending she was fine. Her spoon clinked quietly against the bowl as she stirred her soup without tasting it. Around her, conversation swelled. Someone was telling a story about a runaway bull that had smashed a fence clean through. A group of young girls giggled as one of them stole a biscuit from another's plate. Everything felt lively and close, but somehow far away from her. She smiled when someone looked her way, but it was the kind of smile that cost more than it gave. The door creaked open behind her. The cool air rushed in, carrying the smell of sage and dust. The sound of boots followed, slow, steady steps across the floorboards. Conversations dipped for a moment, then rose again. Clara didn't turn to look. She'd grown used to watching life happen from the corner of her eye. Then a voice spoke, deep and roughened by miles of trail and wind, greeting the preacher near the doorway. It had a calmness to it, like a steady river, easy to listen to. The man said something about coming in late from the range, about missing supper last month. A few men clapped him on the back and laughter broke out. Clara stirred her soup again, telling herself she didn't care who it was. But when the footsteps came closer, she couldn't help glancing up. The man was tall, lean but strong, the kind of strength built from honest work. His hat was dusty, his shirt sun-bleached at the shoulders, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Yet there was something easy in the way he carried himself, like the world didn't weigh too heavy on him. His eyes swept the room, friendly but searching, until they found hers. For a moment, neither moved. He hesitated, then walked over with that same unhurried stride, stopping beside her table. He looked down at the empty chair next to her and smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. She felt her breath catch. It had been months since anyone had looked at her like that, not with pity, but with a kind of gentle curiosity. He nodded toward the chair, asking if he might join her. She managed a quiet yes, her voice barely above the clatter of plates. He set his hat down carefully and slid into the chair. The smell of leather and dust lingered faintly around him, something familiar and grounding. He looked around the table, then at her half-empty plate. He asked if she'd eaten, and she shrugged, saying she wasn't much hungry. He grinned and said a supper that smelled this good deserved better than an empty stomach. His words carried a warmth that tugged at the corner of her mouth, though she tried not to show it. He started talking about the trail, about a stubborn colt that had kicked over a water barrel, about a night they'd ridden through rain so thick he could barely see the stars. His voice carried the rhythm of the plains, low and even, painting pictures she could almost see. She found herself listening, really listening, her spoon forgotten in her hand. When he talked about the lightning that split a tree right beside his horse, she gasped before she could stop herself, and he laughed softly, eyes bright with amusement. That laugh, rich and unguarded, did something to her. It sounded like freedom, like sunlight after too many gray mornings. He caught her staring and tilted his head, teasing gently that it wasn't polite to look at a man like that unless she planned to smile too. Her cheeks flushed, but then, almost without meaning to, she did smile. It came slow, uncertain, but real. He seemed pleased by that, like he'd just accomplished something important. He told her his name, Luke, though most folks just called him Tex on account of where he came from. He'd been riding from one ranch to another, taking work wherever it came. Said he liked the road, the quiet of open land, but sometimes missed the sound of voices at supper. Clara told him her name, though she didn't say much more. He didn't push her, didn't pry. He just talked in that calm, easy way until she found herself answering questions she hadn't planned to. About the small farm she ran alone now, about the horse that still refused to let her saddle him, about how quiet the evenings had become. He listened like it mattered. The noise around them faded into a soft backdrop, the scrape of chairs, the murmur of hymns being hummed, the creak of the old floorboards. The hall felt smaller somehow, as though it had drawn in closer around the two of them. When he noticed her plate still barely touched, he stood, saying he'd fetch her something better than soup. Before she could protest, he returned with roast beef, mashed potatoes, and a biscuit so soft it steamed when he set it down. He handed her a fork and told her it wasn't right to talk to a cowboy on an empty stomach. She laughed then, a clear sound that turned a few nearby heads. It startled her, hearing her own laughter again after so long. He smiled, eyes warm, and told her she had the kind of laugh a man wouldn't mind hearing every night for the rest of his life. The words hung in the air, gentle but bold. She looked down, pretending to focus on her food, but her heart was thudding fast beneath her dress. He didn't press the moment. Instead, he talked about small things. The beauty of the hills after a rain, the way coffee tasted best over an open fire, the sound of cattle lowing before dawn. His voice was steady, sure, the kind that made the world outside those walls feel bigger but also safer. She found herself asking questions just to keep him talking. When he mentioned losing his own folks years ago, his tone softened. He said it plain, without self-pity, just truth. She understood that tone. It was the same one she used when she spoke of her father. For the first time in months, someone didn't change the subject when grief surfaced. Instead, he met her eyes and said sometimes the only way to keep the past alive was to tell its stories over supper with someone who'd listen. She felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back and nodded. He didn't look away. That small, wordless exchange said more than comfort ever could. As the night wore on, people began to leave. Chairs scraped, doors opened and closed, the laughter faded. Still they lingered. The preacher's wife passed by and smiled knowingly, asking if they wanted another slice of pie. Luke said yes before Clara could answer, and soon they were sharing apple pie off the same plate, the crust flaky and sweet. He told her it was the best pie he'd ever had, though she suspected it wasn't the pie that made him say it. Outside, the crickets had started their song and the moonlight spilled through the windows in silver streaks. The church bell gave a soft chime as the clock struck 8. Luke stood and held out his hand, asking if she'd walk with him a bit before heading home. She hesitated. She never walked with strangers. But something in his gaze wasn't strange at all. It was steady and kind, like an open road waiting for the sun. She placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses of a man who worked hard and spoke honest. He helped her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other as the hall emptied around them. He told her softly that she didn't look right sitting alone, that someone ought to be saving her a seat from now on. The words were simple, but they settled deep in her chest, melting something that had been frozen since spring. She wanted to answer, to say something back, but all that came out was a small nod and a smile she couldn't hide. They walked toward the serving table to fetch one last cup of coffee before leaving. He teased her gently about how she'd have to come early next Sunday to save him a place again, and she told him maybe she would. When he laughed, the sound mixed with hers until it felt like the hall itself had come alive again. As they stepped outside, the night wrapped around them in soft quiet. The sky stretched endless and dark, the stars burning clear above the steeple. He walked her to her wagon, talking about little things, how the wind smelled before a rainstorm, how the plains looked when the sun came up red over the horizon. Before she climbed up, he took off his hat, his eyes meeting hers once more. He said he was glad he'd stopped by that night, that he almost hadn't. She told him she was glad too, though her voice trembled just enough to give her away. He tipped his hat, wished her a safe ride home, and said he'd see her Sunday. As she guided the horse down the dirt road, the lights of the church faded behind her, but something warm lingered. For the first time in months, the road didn't feel so empty. She found herself smiling into the night, her heart lighter than it had been since her father's funeral.